All right. Good evening. Hi, Mark. Hi, Mike.
Yeah,
Good to see
Hey,
you.
Shane. Thank you.
Of
thanks for having us.
course. Yeah. Tonight, we're really thankful to Mike and Mark for being willing to have this conversation with me to hold space for men's experience in purity culture. Thank you for trusting me with this and trusting our listeners with this. We've talked so much with women about women's experience, which I think is incredibly important. But the way that sexuality was talked about or often not talked about in the church also affects men, and therefore it affects our relationships too, right? Men and women. And so I asked Mark and Mike if they'd be willing to share their experiences and how purity culture has affected them growing up in the church and being part of the church. So I think I'll just turn it over to both of you if you want to each introduce yourselves um, and tell a little bit of who you are and then why having this conversation is important to you. Mark,
Go.
why don't you go ahead and start?
Okay. Yeah. Well, thanks a lot. Thanks for doing this, Jana. And I'll just say, like, talking about men's experience is very important. I know from experience, it's very important to not diminish because I think it's fair. I struggle with how to say this, but it hit women very hard, purity culture. And I honor that and respect that. It hit women hard, but we also suffered. That doesn't,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't want to diminish. And yet I feel it's very important to talk about how it affected us men as well. So thank you for doing this, and just maybe an acknowledgement to all the women who suffered so terribly, even by decisions I myself was making. Because so for those who don't know, I spent 27 years in the work in Washington, Alaska, California, quite a few years in Baja California, Mexico, and Arizona. And I stepped away from the work in fall of 2023, and I stepped away from the church altogether in February-ish of 2024. So why am I doing this? I don't want anybody else to live the way I live.
Thanks, Mark. Mike, what about you?
Yeah, so I grew up in the church, and uh, I think I was fourth and fifth generation, depending on which side of the family you look at. My wife and I left the church in 2010, shortly after we got married, after we had a crisis of faith, and then yeah, kind of just skated along for a long time, kind of on our own, trying to figure things out without much support or community. Many people will probably know me from the X2x2 support group on Facebook and various other things. But as far as the why that I wanted to do this, it's really kind of two main reasons, I think, is to diminish a little bit of the shame around this whole conversation, the whole topic, and also to encourage parents to have these conversations with their kids so that their kids don't have the same experience that I had growing up as a man and all the struggles that came with that in the silence. There was just a huge load of silence around the whole topic. And in the absence of any instruction, you make up kind of the worst case scenario in your head, I think.
Yeah, we've talked about that in the women's episode. Like children interpret silence as it's something so bad and so shameful that that's the reason it's not being talked about. That's just naturally how we are as kids. So I agree. It's really important to talk about it. And that's why we're having these conversations is to start practicing talking about it. And even saying the words out loud can be hard. So thank you guys for being willing to do this. And I did want to say briefly for those people who are listening, we probably will get into some sensitive topics tonight like porn, masturbation, sexuality. So, like every other episode, just please listen to yourself and listen to your body. And if it's something that you don't want to listen to or can't listen to, that's completely fine. Feel free to turn it off or take a break and come back later. So, I think to get started, maybe Mike, if you want to start with this one, and then we can have Mark answer too.
Sure.
Just talk a little bit about your childhood. And when you look back at your childhood, what comes up for you when thinking about purity culture?
Yeah, so I mean, as any, young man living on this planet will experience, as you get into your teen years, you start discovering porn. And in particular, I was kind of in my teen years at the dawn of the internet, right? So parents didn't have much to go on in terms of knowing that they needed to censor or have any kind of control over that access. And so it was really kind of the Wild West for me. And in terms of the sexual education that I was getting, I was allowed to participate in sex ed in school, but it was the sex ed of the late 90s. And at least in the area that I grew up in, which was in the Pacific Northwest in the United States, it wasn't exactly an abstinence only sex ed, but it was just one step away. Like they would tell you how to have safe sex and they would teach you about STDs, but it was always like a doom on you if you
Mm.
participate in this kind of stuff. So, as a result, I got my education from the schoolyard and I got it from the internet. And I will say one positive resource that I came across in my teens is a radio show called Loveline. And back well, I think it started in the 80s, but when I was growing up, Loveline was on 10 o'clock to midnight, and they were talking about everything sex related, sex and
Wow.
masturbation, how even like drug use and relationships. I cannot overstate enough actually how thankful I am that I came across that resource. It was very vulgar. To this day, I can't believe that they actually allowed that on the airwaves for anybody to listen to, but it was really monumental for me. And I learned not only how to have safe sex and things, and also learning that masturbation is normal. Like they were talking
Hmm.
about it freely on this show. That doesn't necessarily mean that I was feeling free to talk about it, but I
Hmm.
at least heard it from two adults talking about it as if it wasn't a big deal. And so, yeah, the other thing that I really took away from that show was to listen to your partner. They really
Hmm.
stressed like consent and all that stuff, and I wasn't hearing that from any other places in my life. And so I really credit the Loveline radio show for kind of exposing me and helping me to understand that there's two people in that, in a relationship equation
Wow.
that
That's
partner needs to be listened to. Yeah, if you go back and on YouTube, you can find episodes of it. Again, it's very vulgar, but man, I don't know what I would have done. I would have been so much more clueless without it, um,
yeah.
coming out of my teens if I hadn't been able to listen to that quietly on my little radio in the secret in my
Yeah.
bedroom. Nobody knew that I was listening to it. It would have been frowned upon if anybody knew what the content of it.
Yeah. I was going to say, do you feel like you could ever ask your parents the questions you had?
No. So and this is not necessarily, I want to be clear. I don't blame my parents for the lack of education that they gave me because I know that they had the same lack from their parents and they were not set up or educated to provide that kind of education. But yeah, I didn't have in my own personal life, I didn't have a single person that I could ask about any of it, that I felt comfortable asking about any of this stuff because I felt like it was all taboo and
Yeah.
uh, and against the rules.
I think that's a really important point, Mike, because when kids don't have somebody, they do exactly what you did, right? Like they go online or radio shows back then, maybe podcasts now, and
Right.
they go where they can. And from what I've read, I mean, inevitably they end up seeing porn, right? And probably not very ethical or porn that portrays women or men in a positive way. So that's why I agree with you. Like, we need to start talking about this stuff as the parents so that we are prepared to talk to our kids about it and to have those conversations and to be a safe adult for them to come to.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you wanted to share with childhood, thinking about being in the church?
I think the other thing that is maybe worth mentioning is like masturbation. It never was like told to me as like, oh, it's definitely wrong. But so nobody like sat me down and told me that, but I inferred it very heavily from the culture of, sex being bad. So therefore, I assumed that this was related to that, so it must be just as bad. And
Right.
so yeah, without saying the words out loud, the church was, and really, I should say, society was doing this too. It wasn't just the two
Yeah.
by two church that was, imposing this. We lived especially in the late 90s, early 2000s, it was a very kind of, I don't know, like everything was very sexualized, but at the same time, you didn't talk about
Yes,
it.
absolutely. Yeah. Tina Skirmer-Sellers, she did a lot of research on this too, and that's what she says. Like the whole culture was very much that way. Like you had MTV and all of these things being like so sexual and misogynistic, and then like not talking about it with kids, right?
Right.
So I think it was a cultural thing as well. Absolutely. Mark, did you have similar experiences?
Yeah, very, very, very similar. Like almost entirely inferred.
Hmm.
Like very little was ever actually said. It's interesting. Like one way that worked is like we heard about school programs teaching safe sex, and I think like in middle school, we must have had some in high school too. I remember one class, boys went in one classroom with a male teacher and the girls and the female teacher, and they
Hmm.
had a couple classes on sex ed, a couple hours but we'd hear about teaching safe sex, and that was like totally derided. Yeah,
Oh,
that was the work of the devil to teach safe sex because
and where did you hear that message?
every once in a while someone in the church or family or whatever would be like, well, yeah, safe sex is just, it's sex bad,
Mm.
they're teaching kids to have sex before marriage and facilitating sin and all that. The interesting thing for me is I never, well, there's lots of it, but I never heard the phrase purity culture
Mhm.
until like about last couple of years. And like you hear some of these voices that were big in the purity culture, like I don't think I ever heard those. Yeah, I hear other people, experts, and talking about purity culture, and I'm like, well, that was never, and yet we got it.
Mhm.
It happened to us. We were enmeshed in it, and it just highlights again to me, like we thought our church was like this special, unique island that had evolved and developed all by itself into the perfect one true way of God. But like we were, everything that was happening in the culture around us formed our church. Like
Yeah,
we were shaped by purity culture, and most of us never even knew what purity culture was. Like it
right.
wasn't it wasn't near as explicit as in some of the mainstream churches, but it was osmosisized from them into us somehow. And yeah, like the only kind of, I would say, say with a bit of snark, that the only bit of education I got from, and again, I don't blame my parents, our parents, but the only education from parents or from the church was don't be sexual.
So what did that, so I'm curious, Mark, don't be sexual. When you heard that as a kid, what did you
Well,
do with that? What did it mean to you?
again, it was inferred. It was never said, especially as for those who don't know about our church, the ministry is required to be celibate. And so, of course, if you're celibate, you can't have sex. And so the only way to do this is to not be sexual, because any sexual activity as a worker is forbidden. So
Mm.
if you engage in any sexual, and it's never said masturbation is wrong, but go back to what Deuteronomy, the man that spills his seed on the ground to be cursed of the Lord. And yeah, we just knew that, and there was shame every single time, and guilt, and yeah. So very unhealthy way. Yeah. And I guess I would, yeah, that's probably enough rambling. Very similar to Mike, except I didn't
Yeah.
end up getting married until
Yeah.
later.
Right. So your lives kind of took different paths there.
Yeah.
Mark,
Yeah.
did you feel like you were, even as a teen, stuck in this cycle of masturbation and then shame and guilt and like repentance and then doing it all over again?
Yeah, and I think there's an important to a broader subject of addiction, and I understand the problems. It's a huge conversation whether pornography is an addiction, a compulsion, or whatever. And I'm no longer even comfortable saying pornography is wrong or bad. It's situational. I'm not saying it's good. I'm not saying it's bad, but I would refer to mine as an addiction, whether that's clinically correct or whatever. And somebody, like talking about an addict, they said, well, if they didn't enjoy it, they wouldn't keep doing it. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. I hated myself every single time.
Mm.
Yeah.
That's awful.
Yeah. Yeah. And you
Yeah.
you you read the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and Bob, I think it was Bob, who one of the founders, and he starts off promising God that if his daughter will live, if he'll quit drinking if God saves his daughter and lets her live. And that night he finds himself in a bar drinking and believing in his heart that with every drink he's killing his daughter.
Oh,
He wasn't enjoying those drinks.
yeah.
And that's, it's a big, that's, we're going off on a tangent. I'm going off on a tangent about addiction. But yeah, every like guilt, shame, and repentance. And I
Hmm.
drive down the freeway. I'm a truck driver now, and I drive down the freeway and see these billboards: shackled by lust, Jesus sets you free. Well, he didn't.
Mm.
He sure didn't. And
Right.
I have great
Yeah.
respect for Jesus. I have great respect for Christianity. I have great respect for prayer still. But we don't need magical thinking. We need resources. We need help. And I think that's why we're doing this.
Yeah.
I appreciate you bringing up the addiction piece of it. And like I spent pretty much all of my teen years from my perspective, from what I feel like it was an addiction. And not because like I was, it's not the same as a chemical addiction like you get from a drug or alcohol, but um, I couldn't stop and I was changing things in my life to make room for it, right?
Mm.
Which was not, it just wasn't a healthy thing for me to do.
Yeah.
And I think, prior to having this conversation, Shannon, we were having conversations about, whether it's actually are you addicted or are you just pursuing that thing that is like taboo? And so
Right.
it makes it all that much more alluring. We were stuck in this church where women aren't even supposed to show their legs or their shoulders in some situations, And so it makes the female body just all that much more mysterious and enticing.
Yeah, that's such an interesting point, Mike. And I think that's, really basic psychology, right? Laura Anderson, in one of her podcasts, she likens it to like chocolate cake. And if you tell someone they cannot have chocolate cake, I mean, that's all you're going to want to eat, right? Like, when can I have my
Mhm.
chocolate cake? And then if someone says, there's some chocolate cake on the counter, like, have it whenever you want. And you're like, oh, well, I mean, could have some today or tomorrow, like, no big deal, right? Does that hit for you or
Yeah,
maybe not, Mark?
I'm not sure. I'm a
Okay,
skeptic on that if I
that's
understand what you're
fair.
saying.
Yeah.
Like I worked for Mayflower Moving Company before I started into work up in Anchorage, Alaska, and there were pornographic magazines in the break room. And my coworkers could sit down for lunch with a pornography mag and just be looking at it, and it didn't affect them apparently in any way. And so that would be like an indication that it wasn't forbidden to them and they could handle it fine, take it and leave it. So possibly that's true, but I'm pretty sure they were also having sex every chance they got. So, you know, I yeah,
It's
I don't
complicated.
know, but
Yeah.
it is an essential. I will say sex and sexual connection is an essential part of being human. So to say, yeah, it probably the forbidden part probably changed the dynamics a little bit, but not the whole. Yeah, it's a lot more. It's a lot more than that, I guess.
It's a lot more than that.
I agree.
It's a very reasonable. It's a very reasonable. What we were doing was extremely reasonable.
And
Yeah, and I think that's the, sorry, go ahead,
oh,
Shannon.
I was just going to say one of the sex educators that I've listened to a bit, Erica Smith, she talks about they've done studies actually, and they found that the more highly religious you identify as, the more likely you are to self-identify as having a sex addiction or a porn addiction. So again, kind of going to your point that you guys were talking about, you think everything is bad and not normal or a sin, right? And maybe,
Right. Yeah.
and again, we're not like making calls on there's absolutely like real addictions. So, um,
Well, and I'll say that like there's something to that. Of course, we're only scratching the surface on this conversation.
yeah.
And I think like we can't say to the viewers enough. Look for resources.
And we are not
But
experts by any
no,
means.
no, we're not. Right. And so I will say in my younger years, there was shame and guilt every single time for me with pornography, masturbation. As I got older, it's not just sexuality, but so many developmental things are stunted for so many of us growing up in the two by two church. But as I grew into a healthier spirituality, a healthier emotionality, healthier in a lot of ways, as I got older, I still felt bad about living a double life because by implicitly, we in the ministry were presenting an image of sexual purity and I wasn't living that way. And so I felt guilt about the double life, but I just could no longer feel guilty about the act. And I just came to realize like, this is just part of being human. It's not a big deal, guys. We're human beings and this is what
Yeah,
human beings do. They engage in sexual activities. Duh.
Yeah, it's so fascinating, really, just how what a well kept or how the silence was kept around this when everybody is doing it. And Shanna, I don't know if you can speak for the female segment of the population,
I'm not
all
gonna do
females,
that.
but
No.
I can speak for 97% of men. Everybody was doing it.
Yeah,
Yet
Yeah.
nobody felt comfortable talking about it. It's really it's quite a bizarre situation. And again, not just in the church, but just in society in general.
it is.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So thank you guys for talking about it. I'm curious, as you got older, like you've talked about your teens, like as you moved into like dating and maybe some relationships? How did this show up for you?
Yeah, so when Abby and I started dating, so there was, and she's given me permission to
Okay.
speak about all
I was gonna
this.
say only share
Um,
what you feel comfortable sharing,
yeah,
please.
when shortly after we started our relationship, she told me that she had been sexually active in the past. And that shouldn't be a big deal, especially, we were both, I'm not gonna say well into adulthood. We were barely adults, right? And
Yeah.
and really we were, yeah. But it was a big thing for me to grapple with. Like, it felt like there was some kind of purity that had been lost, I guess, in my mind because obviously I was very naive. I just assumed that nobody was having sex, and it turns out, I think a large portion of couples, even in the church, were having sex. But I had to really grapple with that for an amount of time so that I didn't look at her as like the broken, the broken, like a broken person. And also, the once we got into our relationship and things started developing, we there was always this kind of an unspoken, like, how far are we going to go, right?
Mhm.
And we didn't talk about it very explicitly. It was just kind of just going with the vibes thing. And so, it turns out we didn't actually have sex until like 2 or 3 months before we got married. And at that point, we'd already been engaged for 3 months or whatever. We were like, what are we doing here? Who do we think we're fooling? Like, we don't get to our wedding day, sign a paper, and magically you know, it's gonna be fine. We're already committed to each other. So, um, we made that choice, but there was also shame involved in even doing that. Like, we we knew we couldn't talk about it with any of our peers around us. Like, it
Yeah.
was a thing, that it was a secret that we had to hold on to. It just doesn't feel good
Yeah.
to hold on to a secret about your relationship. Like,
Yeah. A lot of that resonates. And thank you for validating. I mean, for me as a woman, that was very validating to hear you say that you did feel some expectations around purity because I've felt that as a woman.
yeah,
So thanks. Yeah. How about you, Mark? I know I mean, you had a different life trajectory. So, um, does any of that resonate with you or?
Yeah, I never got that far along with any girlfriend. I probably only had one sort of serious girlfriend growing up, and that didn't last very long. I mean, I was so emotionally immature, it didn't last very long. But yeah, I mean, I do remember the few times we were together, my thoughts were only about sex, and yeah, very very much objectifying of women, I guess I would say. And I think she made a very good choice to call it off.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting what you say, Mike, about the shame too that comes with that, right? Like something that should be a normal, like joyful experience for a couple. It changes,
right.
right?
Yeah, and it wasn't that it was not joyful. It
Hmm.
just had a little bit of a tinge on it, right? Like, we both knew like what we were doing was not approved.
Hmm.
And, I mean, if workers had found out, there might have been actual consequences, or,
Yeah.
whatever a worker can do about something like that. But there might have
Yeah.
been more shame piled on top
Yeah,
we
Mike,
already were putting on ourselves.
I would have come and had a visit with you.
That's right.
And what would have that looked like, I wonder?
I don't even want to
Well,
imagine.
there would have been quite a bit of hanging of my head, and yeah, and expressing disappointment, and yeah, and more
Oh,
shaming.
man.
We would have
Right.
piled the shame on for sure. Yeah,
And that's the thing. I mean, the ministry, most of them are very well intentioned, but they don't they're not providing anybody any tools to not do this stuff. They're just like,
Yeah.
pray harder and,
yeah,
be more godly. That's the answer. And like, what does that even mean?
and like there's been a lot of talk about the celibate ministry in the church the last couple of years, and yeah, of course, yeah. Anyway, I'm not for it. Um, but I've heard about an order, a Catholic order of monks, and like in that situation, I forget what the first step initiates, and it's like an 8-year process to become a full member of the
Hmm.
monastery. And in that 8 year, the older monks are observing them and watching them. And they could say after 8 years, we've been watching and we don't really think this lifestyle is for you. It doesn't seem to be
Hmm.
working. And so we're going to set you up on another path.
Hmm.
And like and but the point was there's resources, there's
Hmm.
teaching, there's support, there's guidance. And literally in our church, for a brother worker, and I expect for sister workers, the only thing there was this implicit, don't be sexual. Yeah, there was no resources, there was no guidance, no,
Yeah.
and there's tons of resources available. And today I've gone back and I've looked, and I don't even know what the Bible says about sex before marriage. I don't think very few people can actually say what it says, because it probably says a few different things about it, and it's talking about a culture so entirely different from ours. Um, when it does talk about, the things like fornication and such, it's really clear to me now that it's as much, if not completely, talking about abuse of power rather than a consenting relationship between two people, two equals.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm not at least bit convinced that the biblical teaching is no sex until you're married. I think that's an invention,
Hmm.
and I don't think we have to be in bondage to that. I don't think it's a bad thing if you can do it healthy to wait till you're married, but I don't
Hmm.
think I don't think it's the only way acceptable in the eyes of God.
Do you think, yeah, what are your thoughts on attaching such a strong, like moral or even like sin, like heaven and hell value to that?
And that's one thing I mentioned to you before the talk. Like
Yeah.
it's hard for me to talk about how purity culture affected us, because I'm no theologian, but like my thinking nowadays is you go right back to Genesis 3, which to me is trying to make sense of and tell the story of the tendency in human beings to, instead of just living life in tune with themselves and the people around them, to the urgent need to live life knowing what is good and bad, what is right and wrong, who is in and who is out.
Mm,
It's a whole method. It's a whole, like, one of the existential fears is the fear of freedom. Like, that's what Genesis 3 is about. It's utterly terrified of having to figure life out as you go along. And that's what did us harm. This urgent need to avoid hell, go to heaven, do right, not do wrong, embrace the good and not the bad. So it's all tied into that.
and the fact that the good and the bad were the same for everyone, or
Exactly. Yep.
right?
There's only
Like
one.
what for
There's
you is
one.
good for everyone else,
Yep.
right?
What is good?
Yeah.
What is good for me has to be everybody else's answer.
Yeah. Yeah. That leads me to a question I had for you guys because you're talking about this, like, so those were good and bad morality guidance rules often in purity culture given to us by someone else rather than us looking internally and saying what feels right to me, checking in with ourselves and our bodies. So do you feel like purity culture, how do you feel that affected your relationship with your body or even like your authentic self?
I didn't have a relationship with my body. I didn't even know that was a thing. And if I had
Mhm.
known it was a thing, I thought I would have considered some wacky Eastern mumbo jumbo voodoo gibberish that was going to take me straight to hell if I engaged with it. So yeah,
Wow.
definitely cuts off connection with the body. I'm probably being a little snarky here, Shannon, but I think I have a right to be.
So how did, like, if anyone said the word body to you or talked about your body, how would you have felt about it? Like, what would have come up for you if you don't mind me asking?
I mean, I never had body image problems. Yeah, we're talking about some pretty explicit things, so I think I can just say, like, one of the healing things I did when I began to work with a therapist was a genital connection exercise where you meditate on your genital area and you connect and you accept your genitals as a welcome and valued member, part of the body. Now, I had to, yeah, it took about 3 times before I could face that. There was
Hmm.
and so many people have a love a hate relationship with their
Hmm.
sexual organs, shame,
Yeah.
guilt,
Hmm.
burden. But yeah, I don't even think I would have known if you had told me to have a relationship and a connection with my body 10 years ago. I probably would have looked at you like, huh? I don't get
Yeah.
it. I don't know what that is.
Yeah.
And now
Yeah.
it's that's a very valuable part of my life.
Right. I feel very similarly. Like like I'm just like I was always a kind of agnostic about how I felt about my body, but I definitely felt like certain parts of it were, I don't want to say bad, but like, my kind of like I probably could have benefited from some genital meditation very early on just to, get used to it. Like it is your body. You own it and you can do whatever you want as long as you're not injuring yourself on purpose, it's I think sometimes we tend to put struggle with our body where there just doesn't need to be struggle. And it's not just us that's putting on it, the culture is putting it on us as well. But we sometimes, the analogy that comes to mind is like the person that is drowning in the water and the person next to him just says, stand up. And the water is only 3 feet deep, and then you look around like, oh, it wasn't as bad as I thought. But sometimes you just can't see the actual depth.
Hmm. Yeah. Kind of building on that, how do you feel that your image of yourself as a man, like what a man's role was, or what your role was, anything kind of related to that, like what a godly man should be? How did that show up for you guys?
So I don't know. I don't know that I thought much about what a godly man was. And also, I left the church when I was 22 years old, so
Oh, yeah.
I didn't have a lot of time as an adult to
Yeah.
like, get super entrenched in some of the things. I definitely, came away with the man is the decision maker. And that I shouldn't say that didn't last. Like that wasn't a core pillar of our relationship. Anybody that knows Abby knows that she's not going to put up with being told what to do. But yeah, I mean, it took a little while of just I don't know, unlearning some of that. That the fact that men don't need to be over a woman, that they can just be equals.
Yeah.
I would say for myself, I mean, I fell into the macho teenager, young adult as much as anyone. But I we had a plaque in our home, and it said the greatest gift a man can give his children is to love their mother. And we had that modeled in our home. I mean, my dad loved and respected his wife, and he didn't treat her as an inferior, at least not to my observation. And so I think I always saw respect for women modeled, and that made it a lot easier for me. At the same time, I do recognize, especially, I was given a significant amount of authority in the work at a pretty young age for my region, and that went to my head. And I abused that over younger companions and over sister workers. Sometimes I recognize that now, and yet I think some of my upbringing prepared me to soften that fairly easily. I think I could have done a lot worse than I did with it.
Yeah,
Did you feel this sense of like, this is what I'm supposed to be doing, like living up to an expectation in that?
I think is regarding, yeah, it was just a given that I was supposed to have the final word in any decision regarding sister workers. I could listen to them and take their counsel and maybe even do as they suggested, but I had to have, and it was just
Hmm.
right to make sure a sister worker never sat on the platform, to make sure I led any meeting I was in, unless there
Yeah.
was an older brother. Yeah, that was definitely drilled. The hierarchy, the
Hmm.
patriarchy was definitely drilled into us,
Yeah.
and it
yeah.
ultimately it is a devaluing of women.
I appreciate Mark mentioning your own parents and the relationships they had because I also like I'm very grateful that I did have a fairly um, you know reasonable relationship modeled to me in my parents. My dad was never abusive to my mom, and they had a fairly, at least from my perspective, a fairly equal relationship. So that probably helped more than I am giving it credit for in terms of how I ended up turning out and my own attitudes toward women.
Absolutely.
If I'd been watching my dad, yell at my mom or be physical with her, I can see where that would definitely mess with your idea of the man's position in a relationship.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point, Mike. Our immediate families impact this so much as well, right? So you and Mark have your experiences, but they're going to be unique based on your families and where you were in the church. And other men, I'm sure, have many, many different experiences who grew up in this church as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Building on that, how is there anything you want to share about how your views of women were impacted? I mean, we just touched on that a little bit here with the last question, but the role of women or how you thought women
Yeah,
should be.
I definitely, especially in the church that we grew up in, the plain girl in a jean skirt was like, kind of put on the pedestal as like the gold standard, even though that wasn't necessarily what we were logically attracted to. We were told that that's what we should be attracted to. And so there was like this weird kind of back and forth in your mind a little bit of like, oh, I mean, because you're obviously, we were also watching porn at the same time. There's like the porn women, and then there's the complete other side of the spectrum, the women with the dresses and the hair in a bun. And so yeah, I don't even know how to describe what that did in terms of how I viewed women. I just know that like it was it was not a healthy way. It was not a healthy like balance of the image that I had in my head.
It sounds like it might have been confusing.
Yeah, definitely confusing. I mean, trying to figure out, you are trying to figure out what is attractive, but you're having to look at attractive through the lens of what's going to be good for the church if you go
Mm,
down that road. Because is this woman gonna be give you lots of kids? Is she going to have a godly home? Is she,
mhm.
like, and obviously a bun and a long skirt are an indicator of that.
Obviously. It's really interesting, Mike, because that's another piece that like as women that's something we didn't have, right? Like men showed up the same. So that's not something
Hmm.
that was part of my experience at all, like dealing with those two different views.
And that's another topic, Shanna. Again, I'm no Bible expert, I'm no theologian, but at this point, I just don't believe that the Bible actually teaches that the man should be the authority. And I'll tell you a little example of that. My trainer is raised in Africa and he's Eastern Orthodox, and he was talking one day and he says, "Yeah, the man is the head. The man is the head." And like, okay, I know. Let's see where this is going. He says, and the woman, she's to be beside him. They're to be side by side. I'm like, well, what? And he says, yeah,
Hmm.
the head, it's higher up, and the man, he's supposed to be the sky, and the woman's supposed to be the earth. And as he talked about it, when
Hmm.
he said head, he wasn't talking about more authority. He was talking about positioning, not authority. It had in his worldview, it had nothing to do with authority. It was all just as simply it's a position. The sky is up, the earth is down. It's
Huh.
but which one's better? Which one has more authority, the sky or the earth? Well, that's not even a question because there's yeah. So I don't believe the Bible teaches what we think it does about the man at the head. I've come to that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I believe it teaches partnership,
Hmm.
and we never could fully be partners with women in the church in the work. Anyway, there was always a sense of higher and authority.
Yeah. Did you have any, like when you were in the work, I mean, you don't have to answer this at all if it's too personal, but did you have any friendships with like sister workers, or was that something that was kind
Yeah,
of like not allowed or?
I was able to. I was able to.
Yeah.
I would hear it disparaged, not direct, never directed at me, but I know sister workers got a talking to from their older companions for
Mm.
having friendships with male workers. But I was able to have good, I think, reasonably healthy relationships with several sister workers,
Yeah.
and I I got pretty good at knowing when there was a line that I was about to cross, and I got
Mm.
pretty good at stepping back from that line.
Mm.
And if I felt myself falling in love with not only a sister worker, several times I saw the road heading in homes we were in, and I was
Mm.
able to step back and okay, I'll avoid any opportunity to be around that person.
And here's where I feel like this purity culture in some ways pitted the other gender as dangerous to us as women, as
Yep.
men, when really like building those relationships is part of being human, right? And so I wonder if also I think for myself, I definitely guarded myself. I don't know about you guys, but like that fear of, you shouldn't be sexual, but like where's that line and did I cross it or not? That definitely was out there.
Yeah, and like a little insight into the work. We're together at preps, brothers and sisters, for several weeks, a couple times a year, and it probably said something about the sexual emotional health of the brother worker in charge, whether brother and sister workers were allowed to sit intermingle on the same side of the table or whether we had to be on different sides of the table. There were times where it was very strict, and there were other times where it didn't matter where you sat.
Interesting.
Yeah, yeah, but quite often, especially in my younger days in the work, brothers on one side, sisters on the other.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's unnecessary.
Yeah.
When women are viewed as, dangerous sexual objects, then, just being friends with one is is a danger because you are maybe even legitimately can be a concern when you are, steeped in that culture where friendship is with a woman is just not really allowed or at least not encouraged because if you get too if you're building a relationship with a woman, the only reason that you're given for that would be to pursue marriage ultimately, right?
Right.
So like why would you spend time building this relationship with a woman isn't going to go in that direction.
A good point, Mike. I think purity culture set us up to be so serious, right? So
Yeah.
fast. Like there you couldn't at least what I took away from it and what I internalized was there's no just like fun playing around dating scenario, right?
Right. Well, because yeah, again, it goes back to like, oh, there's always this danger. Like you wouldn't want to like have kids, having a get together that goes too late in the night because heaven forbid they might get tired and just decide that they're all going to sleep in the same house together, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And then who knows what might happen.
Yeah, I mean, they might get a little bit of rest and then wake up and go home the next morning. Who knows?
Yeah, regarding parenting a conversation, this phrase came to me, and I think it's again, it's an outsized sense of consequences. Yeah, and even this, like, I mean, you were going to really mess up, and you were going to be impure. You're going to commit some sin, or I mean, the worst case scenario is you're going to go to hell if you don't get it figured out right. And it just like, yeah, so much of the church, and I think so much Christianity in general is an outsized sense of consequences. And I think there's a
Hmm.
whole lot more grace and a whole lot more room for failure in life. I think God has built in plenty of room for failure, and He's fine with that.
And I mean, it's just fact that we're humans and we're all going to make mistakes
Yeah,
and we're
yeah,
going to mess up.
yep.
And I think when you live in an environment where you don't think that's true, where you think that making mistakes has these outsized consequences, like you have to put on this outer layer of perfection, right? So you look like you don't make mistakes. And then you can't be
Hmm.
vulnerable, which also like makes those relationships harder. You've
I
got
think
a nice
I think you've
evening
been
light
good.
behind you. It's
It's
beautiful.
amazing.
Yeah. As we get closer to winding down, I have like a couple last questions, but is there anything that we didn't get to tonight that you guys wanted to talk about?
There is I kind of I didn't really hit this much like in terms of like porn and masturbation like going into marriage. And
Yeah.
granted, like I said before, we were 21 and 19 when we got married, right? So I mean that's a whole topic in and of itself, right?
Yeah.
But it doesn't, porn and masturbation doesn't just stop because you get married, right? And, so there was definitely a point very early in our marriage where I was still doing it, but it was secret, right?
Hmm.
And Abby found out and she wasn't upset about the actual like the act, just that it was kept secret. And like that was really, I think, kind of a turning point in our relationship very early on, is that we kind of developed this agreement, so to speak, of radical honesty around this stuff. And it really made a difference going
Yeah.
forward, like and helped to remove that guilt and shame. And also like this was happening just as we were leaving the church too. So we were kind
Hmm.
of opening our mind to a lot of different things. And this was kind of one of them, like realizing, oh, we don't have to keep this secret anymore. We can
Yeah.
talk about it. So yeah, I mean, for anybody watching, I'm certainly not perfect in the way that I conduct my relationship, but radical honesty will go a long way, I think, in keeping that relationship intact and just dealing with these things head on instead of dealing with them with shame and guilt. Porn and masturbation are still parts of our lives to some degree, and that's just the way that as humans, it's just a part of life, and
Yeah.
we don't have to be ashamed of it.
I think that's really important, Mike. It applies for, I think, all relationships, is just talking about it, right? And figuring out where people in that relationship, what's acceptable for you, what's comfortable for you. And tonight, we're not going to make any calls on like what's right and wrong. But I think that's the important piece, is to be able to talk about it and be honest and figure out what is
Yeah.
right for you and your partner. And then with your
And really,
kids,
yeah, and really examine your reasons for why.
yeah,
Your reasons for why can be, rooted in the Bible if you want it to be, or they can be rooted in some other secular, rule book, so to speak. But really think about it. You don't just do things because somebody told you that it was the thing to do.
absolutely. Yeah. And our kids, I think a really important piece of this, at least for me, like as I've been exploring it more and basically giving myself the sexual education that I didn't have as a kid, um, has been really just learning what's normal for humans,
Mm,
learning what's normal for kids and at what ages, so that because a lot of this stuff isn't comfortable for me. I didn't grow up with it being normalized, even talking about sex and saying the words out loud. So I think it's really like if you don't know where to start, like I think that's a great place, is just Googling things. I have some resources, I'll put them in the notes. And I'll be talking to hopefully some professionals in the coming months to, help us out a little bit more with good resources in that area. Yeah, just start learning about things.
yeah.
Yeah.
That I look forward to seeing the stuff that you have coming up in the future because I think it's going to be really important.
Yeah. I mean, we were talking a little bit in the chat before this call tonight, like even about our kids, right? Like how in the world do we talk about all of this with our kids, and what do we tell them, and at what ages? So, yeah.
The one thing on that I'll throw in there is a talk, and I wish I could bring it up. I don't know. It was really good for me several years ago, but they touched on that, and we grew up hearing, at least we never had the talk in our home, but the talk, and they're like, it's not the talk, it's many talks over and over, and the talk one day might be one sentence, and
Yeah.
the next day, a week later, it might be 5 minutes with your kid,
Yeah.
and the kid might walk off in the middle of it, or it might be months between the kid knows what they want and when. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yep, that's what I've read
let
too, Mark.
yeah, let the kid take the lead. That made sense to me. I've not tried it yet. Yeah, I'm not a parent, but I think it's important. I think there's something important, Tana. There's a significant portion of the population would say porn is bad. I'm not comfortable with that, saying that any longer. I thought that for a long time. I would just suggest, if anybody's watching this and has trouble with this whole concept, at least Google the concept of ethical porn. And the reason there's a concept called ethical porn is because there's a tremendous amount of very unethical porn, which is bad. I'm
Yeah.
comfortable saying unethical porn. There is such a thing as ethical porn. And some people might not even agree with that. And that's fine. But
Mhm.
when I speak even a little bit to normalize pornography, I do want to acknowledge there are many marriages where it has been very harmful.
Absolutely.
That's not good.
And we know
And
it's harmful for kids, right?
okay, okay.
Yep.
Uh,
Um,
hadn't considered that, but yeah, when you say that would make sense.
yeah.
Yeah,
Although with internet, and this is why I think it's important that we actually do talk about pornography. Every kid is going to be exposed to pornography. Some studies say between the ages of 6 and 9. Some say it's the average age of 11. Somewhere in there, your kid is going to see it. And what they see on accident is going to be most likely the non-ethical free online
yeah,
porn that's very
yeah,
misogynistic,
yeah.
potentially violent, objectifying women, all of the things that are not good, right? So I think that's why it's important that we do talk about it amongst ourselves and then learn how to have those conversations with our kids because they're going to see it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's going to happen.
And the other quick angle that just to acknowledge the many, many people, men and women, who have really been harmed in the making of porn because it can be an ugly, ugly industry to be involved in.
Yep.
So
And
we're not,
children. Yeah.
yeah, we're not glorifying anything. And underage porn, foul.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah. This is just a curious question of mine. Do you, as men, talk about these things with your friends? Are these topics of conversation?
To a degree, like I have one group of friends that's like a group of dads in
Hmm.
my area, and I can't necessarily say that we've had a lot of conversations about
Hmm.
this, but I think we would all feel pretty comfortable talking about it. And I have actually talked, a little bit about like our sexual education that we received in school and stuff, and actually discovered a number of other men who also got their education from Loveline as well, which is, I think, for my age range is more common than we might think. But yeah, but those are also pretty men that are pretty on the kind of on the liberal end of the spectrum in
Okay.
their views. So, I don't have a ton of conservative friends necessarily, but I think I would be a little bit more reluctant to air things like this with them just because it might not feel safe to have that
Yeah.
conversation.
Thanks.
I'll say, like, I was well over 20 years in the work before I had the conversation with anyone. So we weren't
Mhm.
talking about it, but it's becoming easier to talk about it, definitely, which is a good thing. And I do have a number of friends that we can discuss it freely and openly. And the interesting thing for me, some of my friends, for me, yeah, there's different drivers. One of my good friends, masturbation, pornography, whatever, was never his big issue, but his big issue was closeness with a woman, not
Mhm.
necessarily physical sex, but physical touch and being close to a woman was his big desire and struggle and
Hmm.
deprivation. So it's different for everybody. But yeah, we are able to talk about it, some of us far more than we were in the past.
That's great.
But
Yeah.
it still can be, yeah, it's not, yeah, still got a ways to go.
Because this is, I mean, I think we're all in different spaces, having been out of the church different amounts of time, but you guys have anything that you would share with other men that has, excuse me, helped you talk about these things, kind of figure things out for yourself? Anything that you want to share with anyone?
I would say find people you can talk about it with. I think that is the number one help from my experience. But I
And
suspect
to ask a little bit more specifically, and you might not have an answer, and that's okay. Is there a way that you yourself know when a person might be safe that you could broach this topic with?
yeah, I'm not sure how to answer that. I have
Yeah.
one friend. Yeah, you get a feel after a while. And I have one friend. He was the first one I talked to about it. Basically, the lady I mentioned earlier pretty much figured out what was going on in my life. And I remember the night where she said to me, it is okay to be sexual,
Mm.
and that permission. And then the reason I started therapy was both because of my faith, my crisis of faith, and pornography. I
Mm.
started seeing a therapist, and then yeah, as I became more comfortable with it, I think people figured out somehow that I was safe to talk to, started talking to
Mhm.
me. Yeah,
Yeah. And
but
that's
to
Yeah, I
tell,
that's
think
a fair point.
like, the single greatest thing for me was to be able to tell your deepest dark, what you feel is your deepest darkest most shameful secret. And I'll just say it's not. It might feel that way, but it's not your most shameful thing. But to be able to share that with somebody and for them to still treat you like a human being is very, very healing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the thing that I've found is people are actually really ready to talk about this stuff more than you realize once you become that person to them who is safe to have those conversations with and that they feel comfortable with. I don't know that you don't necessarily want to walk up to everybody you know and be like, "Hey, do you want to talk about porn and masturbation?" Especially like in my, dad groups and stuff, like there's a willingness to talk about it once you actually, get to that point in a relationship with friends, because everybody else has, really similar
Yeah.
experiences and things that they kind of want to hash out with and figure out how normal or abnormal their experience was.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that can be really healing is to just find out that you're normal too, right?
Yeah.
That simple thing. Thanks, guys. Do you have anything else you want to add? Cool.
I don't think I do. Do you have anything, Mark?
It's a big
Yeah.
topic. We could talk about a lot more things.
Yeah, and there's help out there. I guess I'll say
Mhm.
I could list some things that were helpful to me, but again I'll just say there is nothing for anyone listening, man or woman, whatever your age. I'll say it this way, and then hopefully people can take it. But shame isn't real. Shame doesn't even exist. You are not doing anything shameful, no matter who you are. If you are, if yeah. Of course, if you're actually harming another person,
Right.
get help immediately.
Yeah.
Get help immediately, however you need to do that. But apart from like harming a child or another person, there's nothing shameful.
Yeah.
You might need some help to change, but it's not shameful.
Yeah, I
Amen to
think you
that.
mentioned
Yeah.
in our chat, Mark, just that shame was not what helped you to change your behavior. It was not
All
helpful.
shame. Yeah, I learned one of the things I learned when I started looking for resources that shame cuts us off from connection with others. And it took me quite a while to comprehend that actually the poison of shame is it cuts us off from ourselves.
Yeah.
And you talked about the body. Shame separates us from our greatest source of help, really, a connection with ourselves, with our own
Yeah.
body, soul, spirit. Yeah.
So true. Well, thank you both. Thank you for being so open and vulnerable and talking about all of this with me.